you could say it's one of the first like truly intentional things that I did because it had no rhyme or reason. It had no ROI. It was costing me money. I just love doing it. Here's what I found. These underlying things that sort of tie this human experience together that made me realize this is not this weird side project. This is probably the core of my brand and what I want to do for the next 10 years. And so chasing this thing that had no real purpose turns out to be one of the most rewarding things I've done in my life. And I did not see that coming. If you had told me that would happen when I started, I wouldn't have believed it, and I probably never would have gotten started. So you just have to take that step.
Hi, I'm Whitney.
And I'm Greg. Welcome to the UNBLOCK Yourself Podcast.
Too many of us are stuck on autopilot. We're following a path that seems like it wasn't our choice, leaving us feeling stuck even when life looks good on the outside.
In each episode, we sit down with people who escaped autopilot and are unblocked. They share the stories about what they're doing now and what they did to get there.
You'll leave feeling inspired by the stories you hear, but more importantly, you'll have real tactical steps to get unblocked in your own life. On today's episode, we're talking to Bob Mathers, keynote speaker, customer success coach, podcast host, and if you ask him, a part-time rock god. But more importantly, Bob is someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be blocked, to be living on autopilot, chasing success, but feeling disconnected from what actually matters. In today's conversation, Bob shares the pivotal moments that forced him to wake up from personal loss to getting sober to a terrifying health scare with his son, and the intentional choices he made to stop letting life happen to him. We dive into the messy, real work of getting unblocked, why it's hard, why it's worth it, and why creativity and curiosity are two of the most powerful tools that you have. And make sure you stick around until the end because Bob shares a piece of advice that we haven't been able to stop thinking about.
So, Bob, truly, we couldn't be more excited to have you on as our first guest to the UNBLOCK Yourself podcast. Welcome, and we're so glad you're here.
I am really excited to be here. A little, unusually nervous, actually, because I've been a guest on a bunch of podcasts and I am loving it. But number one, feels like a lot of pressure.
Well, I think you're reversing it because you get to be the one in control asking the questions on your own podcast a lot, the Growth Mixtape, which we love. And so maybe for you, this is, you're showing up and you just don't know what we're going to throw at you, I guess.
That's true. And I'm looking forward to a few curveballs.
Okay. Well, something that's connected us, we've known each other for a long time, but we had a long period there where we weren't in each other's lives, and we've recently had a chance to get back. But one of the things that I remember bonded us from the start was music. Sitting in a Chicago bar, actually, and one of our favorite bands came on, and it was a Canadian band, and we had some conversation about that. So we just wanted to start here, Bob. What is something about Canadian artists in your mind that makes them so distinct from American artists?
I don't know that there's actually anything that ties all Canadian artists together. I love this question. I was listening to a podcast, or maybe it's an Instagram reel recently, and they asked somebody about kind of like the desert island question, if you could only have one song to listen to the rest of your life. It might have been Chris Pratt, and he started singing Hallelujah from Leonard Cohen, who of course is Canadian. Now that is, I think, the most covered song in the world. If you go on search on Spotify, there are literally 50 versions of that. Every one I've listened to, I've cried. It is one of the most beautiful songs ever written, but I wouldn't say there's anything Canadian about it. But there are Canadian artists like Gordon Lightfoot or the Tragically Hip that can write a song that's so full of Canadian imagery that it could not be about any other place on earth. I think we as Canadians have a hard time articulating what it means to be Canadian. But man, when you hear those songs about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald or Nautical Disaster by the Hip, it's like you're on that boat. You're freezing cold. It couldn't be anywhere else.
I think there's something to that so many stories are told vividly in other formats that aren't Canadian stories, but when it comes to music, there's some artists that just nail it. I think that's a good characterization. Yeah, we wanted to start there because we just have a love for music, and it's a theme that runs through all of what we do, and wanted to hear from you on that, Bob.
Well, we could talk about music for this whole episode, really. I'm sure that we could. We would like to dig in a little bit. Bob, Greg mentioned this, but we've known you for a while. You worked with Greg, we worked together. So there's been some overlap there. And I think, and know and see, even since we've reconnected, you've gone through a massive amount of transformation since we've been connected last. Before we get to that point, I'd love to hear just a bit like, what did life look like for you? So through your 20s, your 30s, 40s, like your professional life, what was that like for you?
I think it's probably played out the way a lot of people's 20s and 30s played out. You know, I was one of the first people in my family to go to university. And so I went to university, got a degree in economics. It wasn't something I was particularly fascinated by or passionate about, but it's something that came fairly naturally. I got good marks in it. I graduated and I got a job in accounting. And don't love accounting, but they offered me 30 grand to work in accounting. So I went and did accounting for a while. So my career, I guess I would describe it as just a series of doing a good job, getting promoted, getting hired away, getting a raise every year, just taking one step in front of the other and never really pausing to think about whether this was something that I really wanted to spend my life doing. But yeah, I guess that's how I would characterize most of my 20s, 30s, even my 40s, I guess.
I know the word, we use it a lot, and I've heard you use it a few times on your podcast too, but this idea of like autopilot. Now looking back, do you think you were on this like autopilot?
Yes, I think that is a good way to characterize it. The interesting thing about autopilot is that I don't think you know it when you're on it. It's just
Mm-hmm.
life. And it was a good life. I mean, most people would look at that and go, damn, that was great. Like you were making good money and you bought a house and you had the 2 kids and the white picket fence and a beautiful wife. And I had nothing to complain about. Yeah, I guess it was just recently, I guess, that a couple of things happened that kind of knock you out of that autopilot. In fairness, that happened to me early in my 20s. I graduated from university with economics, but I was really excited to go back and get a second degree in cognitive psychology because I love this marriage of economics and psychology and marketing and how people made decisions. And before I could do that, my dad got sick and passed away. So I paused school to run his business for a while, negotiate the sale. I was the executor, etc. And so in retrospect, that certainly was something that knocked me off of that path that I was on, that easy path. But it's interesting that I snapped back into my normal life pretty quickly after that. I mean, as soon as all of that happened, then I went and got a job in accounting and I was kind of right back on that path. And I didn't use it as an opportunity to say, wow, life is too short? Should I really is this really wanted to do? Is economics and accounting really what I wanted to do? I just like, oh, there's the first job that's offered to me. I'll jump right on board. And I wonder whether, maybe I just wasn't ready or mature enough to see that as an opportunity.
So, yeah, Bob, you mentioned that there was a few different times that you've been knocked out of autopilot. One, of course, with the passing of your dad. What else? Has there been another time in your life that's kind of shaken you out of that state?
Yeah, there've been a handful of others, and I'm sure many of us could look back on our lives and recount those sort of forks in the road where something happened and we either zigged or zagged or came up with something new. About a year ago, we had a really serious health scare with my son. So he had been sick for, I don't know, about 3 or 4 months. He'd been in and out of doctor's offices, on and off antibiotics. he wasn't getting any better. It was a sinus infection. He had dizziness, he had numbness. He passed out a couple of times. The doctor said, we'll try antibiotics. We put him on. He would get a little bit better. He would get worse. And so we were out at dinner on a Friday night, four of us, my two sons and Jill and I. And he was sick at the table and he tried to get up and he couldn't stand. And so we got him out of the restaurant and I dropped Jill and Will off at the hospital at the ER. And so I go home and I figured, this is, I don't know, maybe finally we'll get some answers. And I go home and I'm sitting on the couch and just, watching Netflix or something. And my phone goes off every 10 or 15 minutes. Okay, we're in the waiting room. They say it's going to be an hour. And then you get into the other waiting room. Okay, we're past triage. Now we're in the separate waiting room waiting for a doctor. And they wanted to send him home. And to my wife's credit, she's like, I'm not leaving this hospital without answers. We're not going home. And she forced them to do a CT scan. And I'll never forget the text that I got because all it said was there's a mass on his brain. Now, I don't know if you can imagine what it was like. I was in a movie watching someone else's life. And just like, this can't be happening. And of course, you're wondering whether it's cancerous and how bad it's going to be. And so she's like, so she's giving me updates. She's like, okay, we're going to Hamilton. And so Hamilton's an hour away. And she's like, I'll give you updates. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me when you're on the road because I'll time it so I get there and I'll bring some stuff. And, right now we don't have any answers. And she's like, no, we're in the ambulance racing down the highway with the lights and sirens on with a police escort. And so I'm like, okay, so I'm on my way and I don't remember anything about that 45-minute drive. And so to make a long story short, he had a mass on his brain. It was a sac of infection that was 6.5 centimeters wide. And it was in a part of his brain. They were lucky they didn't. Well, if it would have broken, he would not have survived.
Holy shit.
And if you Google this particular kind of infection and you say, okay, how bad is how bad is a 6.5 centimeters? You don't find anything on the internet about 6.5. Like, these things don't get to be any bigger than 4.5 usually. So they operated. So within 12 hours of going to the hospital, they cut open his skull. They drained the sac. He was on antibiotics for 3 or 4 months. He's turned out to be perfectly happy, but his hockey season was over. His team was in the playoffs. Obviously, life stopped. And like, nothing has been the same since, but in a much different way than when something like when my dad died, right? Like, when my dad died, it was like, I swear, a week, and life had just kind of snapped back. I was stressed out and worried about the same things I was before. It's been much different this time, being much more intentional and really trying to stay focused on the things that bring us joy. And I know that maybe sound trite and sort of, but we have not let our life snap back to its original shape. And that was a little over a year ago, and our lives are unrecognizable from what they were before.
Bob, thanks for sharing that. Having just shared an experience of having a loved one go through a medical experience like that, I was a partner in that scenario, but I've thought often about what it might have been like for a parent with their child, and just seeing how you're reacting to that, I think it helps me understand a little bit better what that would be like. It turned out well in your case and everybody's healthy, but fortunately, and you didn't know at that time. And I can't imagine what that would have been like.
I mean, I've probably told that story 20 times and I still can't get through it. There's just, because that image of seeing that text on my phone, and that text is on my phone somewhere, and I have never gone back to look at it. Like, I'd have to scroll for an hour to find it, but it's on there. And no, I don't need to ever see it again.
You mentioned life hasn't been the same. Like, what changed for you and Jill and your family?
So there's something else that happened slightly just a little bit before that. And so I got sober actually 3 years ago tomorrow.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Way to go, Bob.
That's amazing. Good for you.
Yeah, I know. Both of you knew me, got introduced to me in my unsober days. Very different. You'd be like, yeah, that's a big change.
Yeah.
I had this feeling when I quit that I guess it was the first time where I sort of been overcome with this sense of urgency to make up for the lost weekends for 35 years and all the time that I sort of gave up to, either drinking or recovering from drinking. It sort of started there. And then Will's illness was the catalyst. Like that's what supercharged it. And I don't know how I would have dealt with Will's illness if I hadn't been sober. I'd really rather not think about that. But it was sort of like the sequence of events sort of had to happen in that order. Because when I got sober, I made changes with my business about the mix, where I was spending my time. I had launched my podcast, which I'd love to talk about just because it's given me so much fuel and helped me discover, well, the closest thing that I've ever found to this thing we call purpose. But then when that thing with Will happened, you asked me what changes we've made. I mean, my wife, it was obviously, you can imagine, it was really hard on her. She was in her final, 18 months of retiring. She'd been a teacher for 30 plus years. And she was struggling dealing with that. And she just took early retirement. And now she paints. She's always been a painter. She's always been an amazing painter. She's gonna start a business. She's going into art shows. And I couldn't be more proud of her because, yes, I don't know about you or I, but I mean, my identity really was tied to what I did for a living. I think that's pretty common. When you're a teacher, she's been a teacher for like 23 years. Like, hi, Jill, what do you do? I'm a teacher. Like that's all that she's ever been. Yes, she's been an amazing wife and mother, of course, but a teacher is all she's been. And sort of divorcing from that and walking away from that when you're so close to the finish line, just because, again, we realized it's not worth it. Every day that goes by is a day we're not getting back. There's something much better on the other side of this.
There's something in what you said, Bob, which is you shared the experience with your dad getting sober, but it took this third experience to really have that transformational impact on you. I'm kind of annoyed at that for you, but I think a lot of people could probably relate to that. Like, why can't I get it the first time or the second time? Have you thought much about that? What if I could have thought this way or felt this way sooner? Or as you said, is it more all these things just happen the way they would and you feel at peace with that?
That's a great question. I love the saying, trust the timing of your life, because when you make a change, and the first time I remember sort of reflecting on this was when I got sober. I never drank every day, but I love drinking on weekends. And I could count on one hand how many weekends I took off from the time I was 17 to the time I quit when I was 52. And I just remember thinking, of course, looking back, like, God, imagine what I could have done with my life if I had quit when I was 45 or 40 or 35. But nothing good comes of that. I think when you make a good change in your life, whatever it is, and you look back and say, I wish I had done that sooner, that's just a signal that you've done the right thing. And it had to happen when it happened because that's the way it needed to happen. And when I was ready for it, it happened. I've never regretted it. I've never gone back. And I'm sure, I know my wife, there's many, many times when she wished it happened sooner, but I had to be ready for it.
You had to want to quit.
Yeah.
It's funny. This one hits me, I think, a bit. I have just a heavy drinking culture that I've grown up in. My parents, everyone, there was lots of drinking around me growing up. And so I think this hits me, and I always want to make sure I'm in check. I think about it a lot. I've probably thought about quitting drinking, especially recently, probably in the last couple years, but I'm very curious about it. And I've taken time off, and I can see the benefits. You see it immediately, just in your mood and how you feel and your skin and the sleep and all of the things. Is it's incredible. And I think that's awesome that you've made that change in your life.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks, Whitney. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, kind of coming back to it being intentional, is, when I quit, I never really wanted to admit the things that I missed. The 6.5% juicy IPA on a Friday. Oh my God, it was so delicious. And like a nice Chianti with a medium rare ribeye with blood dripping all over the plate. Oh my God. And like 2 fingers of bourbon around a campfire at a cottage after a sunny day as the sun's going down. You can tell that I've thought about this before. And, but I never really wanted to talk about it because I felt like, I don't know, it just felt unhealthy. And it felt like, no, if I think too much about that, then maybe someday I am going to pour a couple fingers of bourbon out around a campfire. But I come to terms with the fact that both of those things can be true, that I can miss them and be glad and hope that I never do those things again. It's like I can miss an old girlfriend and still hope I never see her again. And right. So I do think about, bringing that back to being intentional, because when you talk about being on autopilot, I mean, there is a lot to be gained from that. There is something that we're giving up when we decide to be intentional and get outside of our comfort zones and take the path less traveled. It's by definition easy. And I've been thinking about that recently and how it ties back, because I don't think we're having an honest conversation about it unless we say, yes, it's wonderful. Yes, it's a better way to live. But goddamn, it's a lot of work. I mean, I get up at 5:30 every day. There's like 3 hours of shit I do in the morning. I stretch, I'm doing writing, I'm doing journaling, I'm practicing gratitude, I'm being mindful. I'm pretty sure there are people that get up, have a coffee, take a shit, and go to work. That sounds pretty fucking easy compared to what I do.
That's most of the world, Bob.
There's also something to this, Bob, because there's a self-righteousness that comes with people that say, I quit drinking and here's all the benefits. I'm getting up at 5:30 now and I'm doing my morning pages and I'm going for a run and I've lost 30 pounds and I'm way more focused. And there's no downside that gets talked about. And I don't think anybody listens to or hears that story and is totally honest with themselves and goes, that's awesome. I think they hear that story and they go, you fucking asshole.
Yeah.
So appreciate you acknowledging that and sharing that. And I think that's been, in this time that we've had to reconnect together, you having shared that you've gone through that transformation. Whitney and I never explicitly talked about it, but I was a bit nervous about hanging out with Bob. Is it going to be weird now? Is like, I want to have a beer and Bob's going to be weird about that. And it's just not been that way at all. It's a part of your story. You acknowledge it. You embrace your new habits and your new routines. And you can look at a drink and you can go, you know what, damn, like that looks delicious, but it's just not for me right now. And I think that there's power in that. There's power in choosing something different. And you're not a fucking asshole about it.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I remember people like that when I was drinking, and you meet the person at the party and it's like, hey, you want a beer? Oh no, I don't drink. It's like, this conversation's over. Like, I'm here to have a good time. I don't want to I don't want somebody making me feel bad about it. I don't want to look at you and all the amazing things you're doing and your sleep and your skin. I'm going to go over to those idiots over there doing shot skis with, with tequila. And so, yeah, the last thing I ever wanted to do is make people feel judged or feel like that. But yeah, it's been 3 years, so it's definitely been a journey, and it wasn't as easy and comfortable in the early days, but yeah, it gets better.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your podcast and the work that you're doing. And I know you've talked a lot about curiosity, and that's being curious about other people. And a lot of that comes through in your podcast. Maybe talk a bit about like what that looks like for you, how you're chasing your curiosity, and a bit about your podcast.
It's called the Growth Mixtape. And it's called a mixtape because it's really a oddball collection of conversations that don't seem to have a lot to do with one another. And it's funny, I was reflecting on this recently. I'm not even 100% sure why I wanted to do it. But, I was a year into sobriety, and I was like, somebody had suggested I should do it. And, I'm a kid of the 70s, man. I grew up watching WKRP. Like, who doesn't want to have a radio show? It's pretty easy. And then I had somebody introduce me to Amy, who was just getting her company getting started and helping independent podcasters get started. And so it wouldn't have happened without her. So it was really fortunate. It just started out as an excuse to chase my curiosity. And I don't know about you for this podcast or for people that listening that might have been entertaining a podcast or took a stab at it. I was paralyzed with trying to think about, who is my audience? What do they want to hear? What could I say that hasn't been said on the 5 million podcasts already on Spotify? And if you get stuck in that fear of judgment, it is paralyzing. And I would have done with this podcast what I did with 100 other ideas that I've come up with and just be talking about them for 20 years. And so it was at that time when I was reading this book called The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. And I took a number of things away from it, a transformative book for me. But yeah, so good. One of the things that came out of that was to put your audience last. That if you chase your curiosity and engage in creativity and just follow this, what Rick calls this emotional charge, and just follow things that feel right, that you're interested in, that will connect with people, because it's that authenticity that will draw people to it. It's not fabricated. I'm not trying to find guests or ask questions because I think that will be interesting to my audience. I just fumble through these conversations, fascinated by topics and people that I'd never normally get to meet. And so it started off as this weird side project. You could say it's one of the first truly intentional things that I did, because it had no rhyme or reason. It had no ROI. It was costing me money. I just love doing it. And after about a year, here's what I found. That by chasing that curiosity, I have talked to professional athletes and speakers and foreign news correspondents and just the most interesting collection of people. These people are on the Mount Rushmore in their respective industries. They are giants in their fields, and they are riddled with self-doubt and imposter syndrome and these underlying things that sort of tie this human experience together, that made me realize this is not this weird side project. This is probably the core of my brand and what I want to do for the next 10 years. And so chasing this thing that had no real purpose turns out to be one of the most rewarding things I've done in my life, and is the fuel for how my coaching and speaking will transform over the next 10 years. I did not see that coming. If you had told me that would happen when I started, I wouldn't have believed it, and I probably never would have gotten started. So you just have to take that step and not worry about what's the point.
I love that so much. And I love that you did it for you.
I had 2 rules when I started the podcast. One, it cannot be about customer success. There are already 100 podcasts about customer success. And the other thing was just simply chase my curiosity. But a month ago, I had a guest on. Her name is Christy Felteruso. She's the Mount Rushmore of customer success, right? She's got 50,000 plus followers. She's a big deal. She lives in New York. And we connected through LinkedIn, and she was sober and I was sober, and we started chatting over LinkedIn. We had a conversation, and I'm like, damn, we should really have you on the podcast. And so this podcast that was about anything except customer success, I had one of the biggest names in customer success on, and we talked about life and nothing about customer success. And it was emotional. We both laughed, we cried, and I hung up and I bawled Like there was something so real and vulnerable about that conversation. And I just kind of sat there in that feeling. I'm like, what is this? Like, this is fucking amazing. I don't even really know this person. And it was sort of that it was like, yes, I need to find a way to bring this to more people, to get on stages and bring this connection to bigger audiences, to have more conversations like this. I don't have all the answers, but I think that's what Rick Rubin would say, like, follow that emotional charge. That is a gift. And I think if that happened 20 or 30 years ago, I'd be like, that was pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty emotional. Start answering email, get on LinkedIn, answer some comments, and I would have let that moment pass. And it was amazing.
I think, Bob, you're kind of bringing it full circle to what I think what we are intending to do with this podcast, what we're intending to do with this work that we're doing, what we've had a chance to do together with you, as well as part of our Unblock Yourself program. But here on the Unblock Yourself podcast, it's all these benefits and amazing things that can happen in your life when you take action, you start to move yourself forward, and you're intentional about what you do. And it's inspiring to hear you talk about it, because I think it does show this picture, and you're so aware of what benefits there are and what life looks like on the other side of being unblocked, really, and moving yourself forward and taking that action. It's truly inspiring, and we appreciate you sharing that.
Oh man, I mean, well, nobody ever asked me about this. Like sometimes when I have guests on, I'm like, oh, this is the chance. I'm not trying to make this about me, but here's a little chance I get to tell a little story here and here. Nobody ever asked me to talk about all this shit for an hour. This is amazing. I was reflecting sort of in preparation for this. I was thinking, so Greg, I think I've known you for almost 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
Whitney, maybe 7 or 8 years. And I was thinking, I would love to go back to Greg 10 years ago or Whitney 7 years ago. And I said, let me tell you what's going to happen in 2025. Whitney, you and your new husband, Greg Boyd, are going to start a new business helping people live intentional lives. And you're going to have your first guest, Bob Mathers, on your new podcast about living intentionally. Be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
We might have to just do an episode about, I mean, you and Whitney working together is how Whitney and I met, and we spent years just as friends and colleagues, and then you leaving the company that you were both at was like the opportunity for them, Whitney and I, to work together. All the fabric of all of this is connected, and we hope it'll continue to be.
I've thought about that because in all the conversations that we've had since we've been reconnected and the two of you got married, I don't think I've ever gotten credit for introducing you.
Well, ours is not this conventional love story where somebody gets the credit.
Far from it.
Well, see, I feel so much better now.
So, Bob, we will give you the credit.
That is hilarious.
So we do want to, we've got a couple closing questions, but before we do, because we talked about this version of Bob that's unblocked and is making amazing strides, but life is this evolving thing, right? It's not like you're on autopilot and then you're unblocked and now life is just unfolding in front of you and you're meditating on the mountaintop and so on. So where are you feeling blocked in your life now?
That is such a good question because I don't know, sometimes I don't know that I'm blocked. It's kind of like being on autopilot. And then I do something and they're like, oh, I guess that was blocking me. There's definitely some stuff around, the emphasis I'm putting in my business on speaking, which is something that I used to do and then got away from and getting back to. And I've been working on a new website for like 2 months and it's freaking beautiful and I'm really proud of it. But I think oftentimes I'm using that as an excuse for other things I could be doing. Because if I really wanted to get out there on stages, I know that my first 5 keynotes, for example, or workshops or whatever speaking engagements in the next few months will be from people I know. And the people I know don't need a website. So I could, instead of spending 2 months on my website, I probably could have spent a couple of weeks just old school emailing and calling people and saying, hey, let's get together. I'd love to try out some new material. So I think that is something that's blocking me. I'm not nervous about it. It's just something that I need to be more intentional about, because my default is to kind of stay busy with this other stuff that is kind of cool and fun and sexy, but is not moving me as forward as fast as just getting out and fricking doing it.
I think that's a great answer. And now you've got your marching orders for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, because it's not hard. In fact, it's a hell of a lot easier than building a new website. That's the ironic thing, right?
Interesting. I'm going to go back a little bit. I've always been genuinely curious. I know you've been in our program. You've talked about doing these morning pages. Have you ever missed a morning?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I missed a couple this week. So for people that might not be familiar with it, it's a book, I think, by Jennifer Cameron. It's called The Artist's Way. And what I love about it is that it's got a few different cool ideas in it. But the main thing are these morning pages. So you get up in the morning right after waking up and you write 3 pages. I'm talking 8.5 by 11, single spaced, handwritten, not typed, 3 pages. Takes me about 40 minutes. How this got started was when I was in the hospital with Will, because Jill would sleep in the chair beside his bed till 2:30 in the morning. I would go back to the Ronald McDonald House and sleep from 9 till 2:30. My alarm would go off. I'd go back, we'd swap out. And I'm sitting in, like, we had to rush to the hospital. I didn't bring my laptop. All I had was my phone. I could not scroll like all night long. You don't want to turn on a light because you don't want to wake him up. You're just sitting there and doing absolutely nothing. So I opened up this journal app on my phone. And of course, because it was such a difficult time, just all of this stuff poured out of me. But that's where the habit started. And then it grew into, okay, going back, sitting down, writing handwritten pages. And it felt really weird. But here's the thing about the morning pages. You never go back and read them, and you never show them to anybody. And the point of it is to get over this fear of judgment that holds so many of us back. It's kind of like going for a run in the morning. No matter what happens the rest of the day, I got up and I wrote for 40 minutes. And I do feel it when I miss it. I missed it a couple of days this week. I got up because I wanted to watch Leaf highlights instead of writing. I know it's hard to explain. It's just been such an accelerant, and God, it's just been amazing.
Brittany, so glad you asked about that, because I think that's helpful. Bob, just hearing that practice, and I think it reminds me of this thought, and we've talked about it before, and it even came up a bit in this conversation, that if only there were ways to shake us into action without it having to be a hospital trip or a family member passing away or a traumatic event or a terrible illness.
Right.
And I think that's part of the point of doing this work and sharing these stories, is we just hope that maybe somebody hears something and they go, you know what? I'm not going to wait until I'm in the hospital sitting beside a loved one to start this habit or routine. Maybe it's something I can just start right now. So thank you for just sharing that routine, because I think it's just such a powerful one for you, and it's certainly been for me. And I think it's spoken about often, about just a way to start the day and declutter the mind.
And I love what Brene Brown says about creativity. She says, unused creativity is not benign. It metastasizes into grief, shame, and fear. And I don't think those words would have meant anything to me for most of my life. But now that I've started, it's like, yes, I think we are born creative, with zero fear of judgment. We're sticking shit in our mouth and just exploring the world, and everything is fascinating, and looking at the world like, well, just like it's the first time you're seeing everything. And that just gets kind of dismissed and set aside as, childlike. It's such a human experience to be able to express yourself and find your voice. And it's kind of a shame that we have to be so intentional about it, that our default is to be consumed with doom scrolling and just stay in our comfort zones. And we have to be so intentional, like you said, Greg, about finding tiny ways to wake ourselves up in little ways, because that wake up is going to come. Like nobody's gonna get through this without a son's illness or your wife dying or any of those things that happen. Yeah, that wake up call is coming.
I agree. Bob, this has been an incredible conversation. And thank you so much for being our very first podcast guest. It's been incredible. We just have like two more questions before we wrap things up. And I really want to know, what is one piece of advice that you could give listeners or anyone that might be listening to help them start maybe making some of those moves to knock them off autopilot and do something, professionally that's meaningful to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I talked about the morning pages, and I know that feels intimidating for people, and it would have felt intimidating for me too for most of my life. But here's something that I read about fairly recently. Now, there's a guy named David Goggins, who is this like ultra marathon runner and ex-Navy SEAL, like a bit of a psychopath. If you read about it. Like this guy would go on 100-mile runs, like a 24-hour race where you run 100 miles. You run 4 marathons in 24 hours. And like, I don't know, I can't even get my head around that. But he talks about these things that allows him to do this by hardening his mind. And he had a really tough childhood. And one of the things that I took away from that book is he talks about this idea of a cookie jar. So imagine a cookie jar and you take a Post-it note and you write on each one of these Post-it notes a time where you achieved something amazing, or somebody underestimated you and you proved them wrong, or you fell down and you got back up. It won't fill up right away. Like if you asked me, I could probably come up with 5 or 6, but over a month, I guarantee I would come up with a bunch of these things. And the point is that when we think about something like getting on stage in front of people or launching a podcast like you are, if you're like me, all you see are kind of obstacles about, oh, what will people think? And what if this goes for a shit? And you very conveniently forget about the 100 things that you've done in your life that are 1,000 times harder than launching a podcast. But those don't come to mind. And so the idea is that you need to intentionally remind yourself. And when you come up with that resistance, where you're like, how am I going to do this? You pull out one of those cookies and you look at it and be like, oh my God, yeah, I fucking did that. That was badass. That's 100 times harder than this. But I really, really like that idea because I totally forget about the crazy, amazing shit that I've done. And it really does put things in perspective. It's like, why am I worried about this LinkedIn post and what people will think? Like, who gives a shit? I'm the guy that did A, B, C, D, and E. And I know we all have a jar full of stories that we just need to remind ourselves to lean on every once in a while.
I need a cookie jar.
Yeah, that is so relevant. I think for us, so many of our conversations are about what didn't get done today, what needs to get done tomorrow, how far behind we feel. So that's, I think, advice that we can take to heart. So thank you for that. And I think we've just got one more question for you, Bob, and we want to end kind of where we started. And it's a little bit of a riff on this, but you're a music lover too. We're music lovers at Vienna Waits, and we want to ask you, if you were left to choose one musician or one album, if you want to be very specific, to listen to for the rest of your life, who would it be, or what would it be?
I'm going to go off script a little bit and probably say Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones.
Ooh.
And it's largely considered to be, it's a double album, so it's a bit of a cheat, but it's just the bluesiest, raunchiest music they've ever made. And last year, I went to New York City. One of my clients took me there for some work. And I was doing this and I was like, well, my son is off school and my other son couldn't come. But my son and my nephew, I was like, hey, you guys want to go to New York City? So you guys can go and explore the city and we can get together for dinner at night and maybe I'll stay for an extra day. And then my son, who also likes the same kind of music I do, Googles, and it turns out that the Rolling Stones are playing Giant Stadium on the Thursday night. So we were going to leave on Wednesday and I'm like, can I really live with myself if I have a chance to take my son to see the Rolling Stones in New York City? Half of their albums or songs are written about that city.
Take a bite of the Big Apple. Don't mind the maggots.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen the Stones, I think, 3 or 4 times. I know they're 80 years old, but I was in Giant Stadium, wherever they call it now, and with my son and my nephew. And for one thing, I don't care what you say, they are still the greatest rock and roll band in the world. These guys invented playing in front of crowds that big. And to see the look on my son's face and my nephew's face, and they've seen a lot of their favorite bands. They've been to a lot of concerts, and they're like, I had no idea. Like, it was just the most amazing thing. And I know they'll remember that for the rest of their lives. And it would have been so easy to just say, you know what? Rooms in New York are really expensive. Like, I don't know, we're going to pay $600 for a hotel room, and then we're going to pay another $600 for the tickets and the exchange rate. And it was like, no, we have to do this. And goddamn, it was just the best experience that I've had in years.
None of you will forget it. That's cool. Core memory.
Yeah.
Bob, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being our first podcast guest. We appreciate everything that you shared, the insights, the stories, and the tactics and tricks that I think not only others can listen to and use, but we can as well.
I'm just such a fan of both of you. I love you both so much. I love the work that you're doing and the journey that you're on. I'm just so honored to be guest number 1. I hope that means I'm the first guest to be invited back for a second time, so I can be like your Alec Baldwin that's here like 5 or 6 times when we're looking back in 5 years on this.
You know what? Let's plan for it.
Open invite.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Amazing. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Unblock Yourself podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow and rate the podcast. Your ratings and feedback mean the world to us. We'd love to stay connected with you via our bi-weekly newsletter called the VNF5, where we share ideas and advice that we found helpful on our own journey to live with more intention. You can also find us on LinkedIn and Instagram. For those Gen Z listeners out there, no, we're not on TikTok. But if enough of you ask for it, we'll just have to do it at some point. The links to find us on social are in the show notes. The Unblock Yourself podcast is edited and produced by Bespoke Productions Hub. Thank you for being here.